a short border update for us?
Yes, I
look
do.
forward to hearing it.
I do. It's been an exciting day here at the headquarters at our operations center. We have a lot of things going on the border right now. Things are coming in. Nothing actionable that I can report right now because we're going to measure 3 times on this one and cut once. But these things are concerning in the we'll call it the sleeper cell world. But until I can confirm it, I don't want to put anything out there. So as we know, we're seeing increased demographic of fighting age males coming across the border. We talked about that the other day with Chris Heaven at Survival Dispatch. And so these things are real. It's not a scare. You know, we're not about fear here. We're about truth. And every single person that's reported, to include Jeff MD, we are all people that come in here with facts, with truth, and that's what's going on. So since the last time we reported, no changes there. The border has a little bit of a lull in it right now. People have, as far as the illegals that have come across the border, have moved down towards the Lukeville area in Arizona. The levees were opened here at Eagle Pass, and that's really why there's less people crossing. Once you open a levee, the water goes up, there's less crossings. And so that's, as we've had a period of rain here in the springtime, that's really what's controlling that. So there is triple strand concertina wire there. It's located at the mile that is Shelby Park, but remember there's still 1,249 other miles of the Texas border. It's been a whack-a-mole game all along since the beginning of Operation Lone Star, and it continued to be. It's been going that way since the days of Pancho Villa. So what I want to do is go ahead and bring everybody in, and then we'll kick that off, and then we can have a really good discussion about current events in the Middle East, and then any other things that pop up, because sometimes these things get exciting.
Exciting. You just ran them off, Doc. You ran them off to another state. Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, you know, when you bring back the Texas Ranger model of the Frontier Battalion, and you got a bunch of guys on horses in the backcountry, that tends to run them off.
Man, that's cool. God, I want to be like you one day. I mean that. You are one of the coolest guys I know. And by the way, I also wanted to say, Admiral, thank you for the effort to be here. This was no small feat. Thank you for your patience. We've tried this a few times.
No, thanks. It's great to be here with all of you.
Yeah, it is good. And I had a really good discussion with the Admiral prior to our show here, and really I want to kick off with a discussion, and I want it to definitely dial down to the current events, but with regard to leadership, and all these men in this room, ladies and gentlemen, are all leaders in their own respect, and all command, respect, authority, but also understand, and this is something the Admiral and I talked about, which is a kind of the focus of his book, The Gouge, and he tested me on that terminology, which is, you know, we've used that terminology before. For me, I call it the bottom line up front and the so what. When a soldier walks in and says, well, here's what I got, sir, and they start dancing around with all kinds of stuff, I need to know exactly why are you in front of me right now, and give me tacit knowledge of what's happening in the dirt. I want to know the scoop, as he called it with me, which is fascinating. So, Admiral, I'm going to turn it over to you, because I want to promote that a little bit, and that idea, because that is truly a leadership quality as we build future leaders.
Well, Doc, very kind of you. And it is, you know, there's a term for it. The book kind of gets into that, the history of where the phrase came from, at least the phrase that is predominantly used in the Navy and other parts of the military, the gouge. The book talks to the history, and it really came from World War II. And my father was one of those type of guys. He's a kid from Brooklyn, who in those days, anything south or west of Brooklyn was pretty much uncivilized. You didn't go there. But he couldn't afford to go to school, so he went to the Merchant Marine Academy because he wanted to study engineering, and he thought a merchant marine career would be enhancing and a way to go. Unfortunately, his timing was not perfect, as he graduated in the summer of 1943, and he went right to the war in the Pacific, like so many young men at that time. And so we had, on his ship, they had, 175 guys, many who had never been at sea before, didn't know their jobs. And so there was a lot of on-the-job training. And actually, they were each looking after each other. each guy trained and invested each other to make sure that they could not only knew how to do their own job, but could do other person's jobs in case they were attacked. And as we'd seen in several ships, when they were struck by kamikazes, the lowest seaman could be driving the ship. But it is really that culture, that philosophy that leaders embraced of their most important asset was their people. And so not only meeting the mission, but taking care of their people were critical. And they took care of their people by proactively making sure they had information and knew what they needed, not just for their job, but for their personal lives as well. And that's what the book is about. And it was kind of a testament to my career. I had 26 different jobs in the Navy, and most of them, I didn't know what I was doing going into them, but thank God for all the people who worked for me and I worked with, who had the trust and confidence and enabled me to succeed. And all I really needed to do was help them succeed in their jobs, and we'd accomplish the mission. So the book is about that philosophy, how that's important in leadership, how it's important in any team. And in the world we're in now, I think it's just important for everyone. It's kind of your contract with humanity. You got, as well as you serve others, their success is just as important as yours.
Yeah, I love that, sir. You know, I was a private when I came in the Army, and I kept a little book of leadership, and I split it down the middle. One of those old books they used to give you with the little binder that was actually sewed in. And I took it down the middle, and on the left, it was like, Sergeant so-and-so did this yesterday. What an idiot. Don't do that. Lieutenant so-and-so, he ate after us today, or he showed up at my point there at the DMZ and, you know, let me sit in the warm Jeep for an hour. You know, I would keep that leadership book throughout my career, right? And then I would try to emulate that as I went along, learning from those ahead of me. And so that's something that I try to do as a mentor, you know, later in life as a lieutenant colonel. I was trooping the line every third night on the border, just sitting with guys and gals and just teaching and listening and learning from them too. So I appreciate that. I'm looking forward to diving into that. But I'm going to ask you a good question here. I may not be perfect in this, but I'm going to try. Man farsi gabsidan kami, amo shoma gabsidan bishar hub. Chera.
Chera hala nemidunam. Farda midunim hala nia. Miduni.
Vale?
Because
I'll do my rough estimate, but knowing the history of the Admiral, it's kind of interesting because this is going to lead us into our discussion. That was Farsi at my best. It's been a while. I'm a little rusty, but I just said, you know, I speak a little bit, but you speak a lot. Tell us, you know, why, Chera. So, you know, the Admiral, I'll let him discuss it, but I think it will lead us into our discussion, which is important right now with actually what's happening in the Middle East, and understanding the culture is probably the most important thing when you're doing unconventional warfare for me, or foreign internal defense, or any of these things that we do downrange, counterinsurgency operations. But tell us about your background there in that region, because I think that's going to help us for context for our listeners to understand why that was so important in your upbringing, and why it was a moment such as this you should have been there.
Well, and I'll ramp it up a notch, in fact, and I think it leads to the situation we're in now and why it's so important. And I think it's important to our national security going forward. Partnerships. Anytime you make an effort to learn a language, understand a culture, you're going to reinforce that partnerships. And in this world where we're so interconnected and dependent with each other like never before, those partnerships are critical. And we're competing for those partnerships. As I look at the world for the last 8 decades, the U.S. has determined the world order. There was the Cold War, of course, and I think we succeeded through that. But we're at the period in history now where our adversaries, be it China, Korea, North Korea, Russia, Iran, and other unaligned nations, are seeing opportunities, and they're partnering, maybe not directly, maybe more indirectly, but seizing opportunities to challenge us. And they see those regions where we're not given the appropriate diligence to our partners, So they see opportunities to step in and not, if not replace that partnership, compete with that partnership. So we've got to be very conscious of that and compete on that stage to bring every partner we can into the fold to cooperate, because we're going to need each other. And I think that's somewhat sets the stage for where we are with Iran and events going on in the Middle East right now.
All right. Yeah. So Chris, Chris Heaven, why don't you give us like a synopsis of what happened in the last, since we've talked, because some significant things have happened. We shared that with the text earlier today, but with regard to Iran and the possible, we don't know. I don't know until we get confirmation, but there was, the U.S. officials did indicate that there was a retaliation for the drone attack.
Yeah, but my understanding is that Israel hit some locations in Iran where they either produce or store munitions, specifically missiles. There's also another report saying that Israel struck a nuclear facility kind of as a warning to Iran to say, we can reach you and we can hit your most valuable assets. There's another piece that's kind of come to light in the past 24 hours as well, Doc, and that's that Christopher Wray, once again, is warning us of imminent attacks on our infrastructure here in the homeland. Mm-hmm. And there's an online hacking group that refers to themselves as Typhoon. And it's a cooperative effort between China, North Korea, and Iran. And Christopher Wray yesterday, for maybe the 6th or 7th time since January, went on the record saying that we are facing imminent attacks on our infrastructure. And just like we spoke earlier in the week with Jeff as well, one of the things we can learn from last weekend as far as Iran's attack on Israel is the first thing they did is they took the power grid down in Tel Aviv. And we've been warning against this for a very long time because we're a first world country with a third world power grid. And then the second thing that they did, and Bob has a ton of knowledge in this area, is they sent the drones in. And we don't have an effective defense against drones, but I would defer to Bob on that particular subject.
Yeah, love to hear your take on that.
Well, drone warfare, as we've seen, has evolved over many decades now, and we're a much different place today than we were coming out of Iran, and that's predicated on events in Ukraine. And I think the Iranians have learned and seen that all along and leveraged drones as part of their arsenal. It's a different target to track, but aside from that, it provides the ability to mass. So numbers do matter against defensive systems and what you're able to track and equip, especially over land. We've always built our surface ships and the Navy with plenty of ammo and radars to detect cruise missiles and threats coming at them. In a land environment where you have to cover much broader area to defend, that presents challenges, and this was the challenge that Israel faced several nights ago. But it's indicative of where drones come from. You've seen them come out of Iraq, you've seen them come out of Yemen, you've seen them come out of Gaza, you've seen them come out of Lebanon. So Israel's got to deal with a 360-degree threat of drone warfare. And we've seen our allies such as UAE and Saudi being struck by drones as well. So it's a very challenging problem, and numbers matter. And I think what was significant in this event, where Iran has gone unchallenged in many years for the various nefarious and direct action they've taken against players, no one reacted in kind. So this was the first time we've seen Israel take military action into the heartland of Iran. And so it is definitely an escalation of events.
I have a question for one of you knowledgeable guys, and maybe this is for Jeff, as a CIA guy. I'm not sure. You were probably in at the time, but I don't know if you all remember, we had a stealth drone, a Sentinel, that was flying, I think, on the border of Iran, and somehow they hijacked it and landed it like right in the middle of Tehran at their international airport. They just stole it. I don't know if that was by design, because Obama was also sending over billions of dollars in cash on pallets, euros and dollars and everything else. So I don't know what that was, but talking about drones, that was like the most sophisticated stealth drone we had, and it landed in Tehran.
It had
So
a
how
weak
does that
link.
happen?
Well, it had a weak link in the flight control system, in that they were able to hack into the control channel and basically take control of the drone and fly it as if it was one of their own. And what's frustrating about that is, like, did nobody think to put some serious encryption on the control channel? I mean,
Yes.
that's kind of a basic thing. It's
That's
like
my
saying,
point.
I have a Ferrari, but I didn't put gas in it.
That's my
Yeah,
point,
and-
Jeff. Was this on purpose? Did they just leave it like that? Because it was literally
No,
months.
I don't think so. I think it was just an oversight. It's sort of like when
Okay,
we
so
sent a
how-
lander to Mars and it crashed because one guys were using metric and the other guys were using US, and they didn't translate them.
Then why was Obama sending pallets of cash to
That
to
was-
the mullahs?
Well, that was, we had seized so much of their bank accounts over the years under, from Reagan on up. And they were trying to basically settle those legal claims and saying, okay, we'll give you your money back. Most people don't realize it, but I mean, Bell Helicopter had a deal to make. They were the 214s, the big helicopters. They were supposed to be built in Iran. This is back in the 70s. And that whole program got shut down when the Shah went out. Well, they sued us because they said, hey, we as a country had paid Bell Helicopter, they sued Bell, for setting up a factory. And you didn't set up the factory. We want our money back. And it took 15, 20 years, but it went to court and they won and they got their money back. It's contract law for that at that point.
It just strikes me as
most
odd
people don't
that
think it makes any sense, but
no, and that's the point. Is if they're delaying these lawsuits for this period of time, why not delay them ad infinitum? It just, the whole thing really bothered me because it looked like it was planned to me, and I don't have any specific knowledge.
Well,
It just seems like I'm very familiar with international laws that relates to these kinds of agreements. I don't doubt what it is you're saying is true, but I also know that litigation can be delayed ad infinitum. Orders
they
can be
delayed this for 40
stayed.
years already.
Yeah,
But I think
Yeah.
some of them, like, someone like a Bell Helicopter, that is still a liability on their spreadsheet.
sure, that
and
is
they
true.
want to get it off.
Yeah. So anyway, my point was this.
To do it.
They obviously reverse engineered this thing. They've obviously had the benefit of a decade or more to do that. So how does that play into their relationship with Israel? I'm grateful this hasn't gone nuclear because I think Israel would love for this to go nuclear. But it's got to be concerning that they have top-notch technology, ours.
Yeah. Well, the thing with the drones is, as to quote Stalin, quantity has a quality all its own. And that was in reference to somebody saying German tanks are better than ours, but he was like, yeah, but we have thousands. And the thing about a drone is, as the Admiral mentioned, is you can send in 1,000 of them. And you send in 1,000 airplanes and you lose them all, you've lost 1,000 pilots as well. But with drones, you don't. And with the drone swarm technologies that's out there that Hollywood developed, of all people, you can have one guy controlling 50 drones or 100 drones. So it's not manpower intensive. You build the drone, you launch it, one guy can fly them all.
I saw, by the way, you said manpower controlling it. I saw where the Israelis have actually turned over decision making to AI as it relates to killing. So
Yeah.
we're past man pressing the button.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Chinese have these little robot dogs with machine guns on them that are autonomous as well. They just haven't put them in combat.
So
Yeah,
Skynet is here.
Skynet's been here.
We just saw their business card. Yes. I've got a question for the group. And this one's really more going to be on the center of gravity thought. Now, when we look at center of gravity from my standpoint as a Green Beret, center of gravity is always the people. It's always the people on the ground. Not the infrastructure, not the back dealing of some sort of I would say corporatocracy or privateer corporation thought, but the people. In this case, where most of the questions that I get out there in the field from people is, are we going to be in a nuclear war in the next week? Who are the cooler heads? This is for the audit, for the panel. who are the cooler heads in the audience and the actors that we're dealing with? Who are the cooler heads that will not allow us to go into that? Because we know that sometimes some of our legislators on the Hill, you have all kinds, but some of these hawks are just killing me. You know, they don't send their kids downrange, and I haven't put one of their kids in a body bag. But how do we get to the cooler heads that are out there, or who are they?
We're going to say
I'll
the
throw them out.
Russians. The Russians seem to be the cooler heads so far.
Yeah, and in this particular fight right now that we're in, you know, with between Israel and Iran, it looks like, and any proxy forces, and these missiles, as the Admiral pointed out, and I believe Jeff, you know, we were talking about the other day, and Chris, they're coming in from all sides. So how do we get to these cooler heads, and how do we intervene so that somebody doesn't press that button? So that's my question. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you got to look at who has a button to push, first of all.
Right.
Israel obviously does. They haven't pressed it. They could have. They'd have been completely justified with what happened, but they didn't. And ironically, I think Iran is kind of taking a step back. It's unclear if they have nukes. If they do, they don't have a lot. Right. But everyone looks at Iran as a theocracy, which I guess technically it is. But it's really kind of a criminal enterprise. If you look at the vast majority of the economy is controlled by the mullahs and the IRGC, and I've dealt with Iranians that were agents basically, who said, yeah, they came in and took my dad's company. They just said, yeah, we want it, and they just took it. And it was a thriving company. It existed for 30 years, and they just came in and took it. And they all live well, the guys in the IRGC and the mullahs and all that. So somebody who has in their country everything is going to be reluctant to see it nuked. It's the guys who have nothing to lose that you have to worry about, not the guys who have everything to lose, because they don't want to lose it.
Okay, so Admiral, from the Joint Chiefs mindset standpoint, how would you be thinking about this if you were up there trying to stop this from escalating? What would you imagine that's going on at the table now in the Pentagon?
Yeah, I'd like to start off by pulling a little of that string we just talked about. Mutual deterrence has worked for the last 7 decades. Mutually assured destruction was the cornerstone of that, and it continues to serve all and everyone well. Part of the reasons those assets were unfrozen for the Iranians was predicated on the Obama administration to reach an agreement for the Joint Cooperative Plan of Action to ensure Iran did not develop a weapon of mass destruction. We've watched them enhance their ability to produce highly enriched uranium to the levels where they have enough materials, but again, we don't know, and very uncertain, but very doubtful that they proceeded on the path to weaponize those things. So all those things are at play here, and goes back to the premise of this argument. I don't think anyone wants to see the proliferation or use of nuclear weapons. I think everybody that's got their hand on the buttons or even involved consider that a bridge no one would ever want to cross. So I don't see us approaching that bridge at this stage. I do think it was appropriate for someone to directly challenge Iran's nefarious activities after decades of that. We've challenged them politically. We've challenged them financially with sanctions and other actions, but that has not deterred them. Will an actual kinetic military event help calibrate the situation, cause them to stop, think, and pause on continuation of the aggressive behavior they've taken, to including striking Israel, but understanding that they've already struck in Saudi numerous times. They've struck UAE, many of our allies. So I think that's the game-changing event of where we are now. I think everyone wants to pause and see how this changes the equation before someone makes a poor decision moving forward. So I think, again, I think the Israeli response was appropriate, but now I think we've got to see how this is going to play out. And I think the cooler heads are at plate here and acting appropriately. So let's give it a little time.
Wasn't
Yeah.
there something called the Samson option that the Israelis had with everything? If they're getting invaded, they have nothing to lose, and the Samson option is to press the button and everybody goes. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, yeah, of course. But again, they're very prudent. They're smart, and I think the calculus has changed as well. When the Obama administration was concerned about a conflict between Israel and Iran in the early 2010, 2012, during the Obama administration, everyone was concerned how the Arab world would react. I think that calculus is much different now, with Iran having struck Saudi, struck Iran using their surrogates in Lebanon through Hezbollah, in Gaza through Hamas, and then in Yemen with the Houthis. I think there's a much broader understanding of the problem and Arab support for a more firmer response to Iran, because it aligns with their strategic interests and presents existential threats to all of them. So again, that calculus, and I think that's part of why the Iranians are going to reconsider their next move and what they're going to do, and move away from more direct military confrontation, as we saw in this case.
Mhm.
Bob can correct me if I'm wrong, but on this subject of nuclear weapons, Mike Sterling, who's our in-house EOD expert and counterterrorism SME as well, has told us numerous times that outside of the Chinese, Russians, and us, nobody has the ability to shrink a nuclear warhead to the size required to put it on an ICBM and send it around the globe. So I would think that I've heard of the Samson option. I would think that the Israelis probably do not have the ability to go beyond the Middle East with any of their nuclear weapons. Is that the case, Bob?
Well, there's a lot of dimensions to weaponizing a nuclear weapon, not just placing it on the war, but targeting information, how you're going to move it. And I think, as you saw in these drones that were used against Israel, many were ineffective because they didn't have appropriate guidance systems. They're kind of shooting in the dark and stuff. So I think all those components are in play, and everyone's assessing right now what's validating what's occurred over the last 2 days to understand that and get a better context for that. And we still have to wait and hear what the Israelis struck, why they struck it, and the impact it has. So I think that's part of that calculus going forward.
I have a follow-up question for you then, Bob. There's been some people online who've posited that Iran sent some old, outdated weaponry towards Israel last week, fully expecting that it wasn't going to penetrate the Iron Dome, but in an exercise to try and deplete the Israelis' defenses in the Iron Dome. Is that possible by chance?
Well, sure, anything's possible. I don't know if it's probable, and I won't not want to presuppose the Iranian strategy, but I think, and military confrontation with the Israelis, some people could contend that's an indicator of how bad things are in Iran at the moment, how much pressure the regime is facing from the local population. And I've watched the whole train ride. I was in Tehran in '79 when it fell. I operated in the region, operations, I won't say against, but focused on Iran on the ground and through other means of watching this for many, many years. The Persians, when you think of Iranians, I think of the Persian dynasty are wise. They move strategically. They think through things. So could be a lot of reasons why they chose at this time to lash out at Israel. But again, I would not want to presuppose. We'll have to see what comments they come out and hear what their thinking is now after this recent strike from Israel.
And on the ICBM thing, Israel doesn't have ICBMs. They have IRBMs, intermediate range. They don't need ICBMs. Everybody they want to get, or they would possibly need to get, is within range of what they have right now.
Good point.
They don't need to hit China. They don't need to hit Guam. They need to hit the Middle East, and they're within range. And a complicating factor, they lost face when their consulate got blown up in Damascus and their number 1 and number 2 guy in IRGC was killed. But you're going to be hard-pressed to find a lot of Arab countries eager to line up to defend Iran. Because, okay, one, they've been, Iran's been, lobbing missiles at them for years, and drones and everything else. There's a religious aspect to this. Iran is Shia. The vast majority of the Muslim world is Sunni. They don't get along. And the only other one with a significant Sunni population, well, besides Iraq, Shia population besides Iraq, is probably Syria, which is why they're over there with Syria quite a bit. But the other one is ethnic. As the Admiral pointed out, they're Persians. They're not Arabs. And the Arabs and the Persians haven't gotten along particularly well for, 3 millennia. So I don't see them all ganging up and, singing Kumbaya tomorrow.
Well, and I think a couple points of that, and I want to get back to Chris's point on this capacity issue. Iran's been a nation for thousands of years. In fact, in I forget what years, the early 80s, no, I'm sorry, the early 70s, I was in Persepolis when the Shah hosted a huge celebration to celebrate the 25th 100-year-old anniversary of the establishment of the Persian Empire, under Cyrus the Great. The Arab nations are much younger nations, so their younger scale's much different and all. And that plays into kind of Chris's issue on this capacity issue. I think everyone around the world right now sees capacity demands on defense industry across the board. As you look at what's going on in Ukraine, their needs of bullets, missiles, all sorts of military capacity. You're seeing Europe now really ramp up their defense industry. One, because I think they're anticipating the return of President Trump and his demand that they contribute appropriately to NATO with the defense budgets. So I think at this time in history, scale and capacity of your resources in your defense industry has significant ramifications, not only for what's occurring now, but could occur, because there's still some actors out there playing who have not made their moves. Russia's made their move, Iran's made their move. Who knows what China and North Korea can do, but they're watching carefully to see this and see if that presents targets of opportunities for them. So it's a precarious time, but Chris, to deplete their short-range defensive issues, it could have been part of the strategy, but I think everyone's focused on that across the board to ensure we have the capacity to support and deal with the current conflicts we're in much less future. And just to tie a bow around that, up until last decade, the U.S. national strategy was always being prepared to fight and win 2 major wars at the same time. Last decade, we shifted that to 1 major war and another conflict of a smaller scale. That's indicative of the defense industry and what they prepared and are charged for. I don't know with the current conflict and where this goes, if that strategy changes going forward.
Well, I had a question.
Yeah, go ahead there, Todd, and I'll
I was just going to say there is another calculus that I think goes into this as it relates to the Israelis as well. And I don't know if people have been watching from a cultural perspective. They built a monument effectively to sacrifice the red heifer, and they were supposed to have done this, the biblical reference to the red heifer, on the 10th of this month, and it didn't happen. And I don't know if it was God's divine hand or the conflict, but I understand that is an issue. Anybody culturally familiar with that?
Yeah, we've heard about that, and I haven't seen any movement on that piece, but that was something that you're going to have that conflict on the religious side, if you will, but also to usher in the Armageddon or the 12th Imam, as depending on what side of the religious spectrum you're on. But that did not happen, and if that's one step less towards Armageddon, I'm okay with that, and that could have been thwarted. But I want to take a look real quick and do a shift now, because we, around 2016, I worked always at the tactical to operational level. Around 2016, for me, I noticed a shift in the Pentagon from kind of the global counterterrorism missions to the to the near peer or peer operations, and there was a focus shift there, and that may have been around that time, Admiral, when you were talking about where we're focusing on from 2 major wars to 1 and then a conflict. But also since that time, and in the last 3 years, we've had a decrease in the ability for ground troops to operate, in the sense that their recruiting and retention has been an issue since the global pandemic came along. And then with the mandates that really shuttered our ranks, and that's been a difficult thing for us to get those in charge to understand. But right now, as we look at shifting now our focus, AO Middle East to AO border, we're still fighting a counterterrorism war down here, with the Hezbollah connection with Venezuela, et cetera. And from the Title 10 side, or the active duty side, we don't have a lot of input there. It's mostly the state of Texas where I live. It is 100% the state of Texas with some partnered states that have been helping us. But we still are dealing with a pretty significant, when we're looking at a needle in a stack of needles, as the numbers on the border have increased, the counterterrorism shift. My concern is that the Title 10 side, or the active duty side, is not prepared to provide that same amount of resource to counterterrorism, as I saw the shift in 2016, still being a green suitor at the time. So what are some of the feelings in the room? Because we had this, I'd like to get your take on it, Admiral, because we did talk about this on the show with Chris Heaven the other day. But there's a shift here, and we've picked up people, not 2 weeks ago, well, a month ago now, in Interpol, Bolo #2 guy that was right here in New Braunfels, Texas, not that far down the road. So these are straight up, narco terrorists, and they're still conducting operations behind lines here, of which some I'm not privy to talk about here, but they are operating in a semi-permissive environment that we are in Texas.
Doc, I think you hit the nail on the head, and it's part of this risk assessment and allocation of resources. We always knew we were involved in the fight in terrorism. When I first came into the Navy and the SEALs, terrorism in the early 70s, and where we formed our Delta Force and SEAL Team 6 after GSG-9, the models, and the Brits had gone, was predicated on the type of terrorism where predominantly in the 70s and 80s, terrorism was taking an American hostage and leveraging for messaging and getting the word out. And we knew terrorism was going on around the world, but didn't present any strategic risk to us. And then we were all taken by surprise on 9/11 when it showed itself to be a strategic risk that they could attack us in the homeland and have catastrophic ramifications. So that drove our funding, our resources. You saw the SOCOM budget and the primary players in our warfare, our counterterrorism forces, lead the efforts in Afghanistan and Iraq based on the capabilities they had been funded and sourced to do. And so for the next 2 decades or a decade and a half, those resources flew. They were well sourced, and that was the #1 fight. Well, in the 16s, China, Russia started coming to the table and presenting, as you saw, Chinese build out their fleets, added their force, these mass, and up to that point, no one would challenge us directly militarily. That all changed in 2016 at the end of Afghanistan. We now had to contend with these threats, and with Russia going into Ukraine, it just reinforced we have to be prepared for these major wars. So you're right, the terrorism threat took a back seat because it was shifted back to the tactical level. But the point you've illustrated, not knowing who's coming into our country, why they're coming, where they're going, and their skill sets reinforce that threat and the concerns we could have and how they present themselves, and the threats through applications of weapons of mass destruction, being nuke, be it chemical, be it biological, have enhanced significantly as well. So we are in this balancing act of applying the resources to be prepared for all of these threats, and that's a daily challenge for all. I would say, though, on the very positive side, over the last 2 decades, our special operations forces have become so sophisticated, so capable, not just tactically, or operationally, but also strategically. And the leaders we're producing bring a lot to the table that were not recognized prior to these events. And you're seeing that leadership permeate throughout the Department of Defense and in the interagency to have effect. So bottom line, I think we're doing a good job, but we've got to be on it every day and prepared for these, as you present, tactical threats that can have the same sort of ramifications we've had before, while at the same time being prepared to deal with state actors who present significant military power threats, great power threats to our nation, and more importantly, our allies.
Yeah, that's a good, I always like having somebody in the room that can give me that strategic level, because it does help me tie it into what we're doing. Here I am, a doctor, a battalion surgeon, flight surgeon in SF, and they sent me to the Q course to become an 18 Alpha. And the next thing you know, I'm in Texas Guard, working with Green Berets down here as an officer, 18 Alpha. So that system produces a good product. And when we've been tested downrange for 20 years, we kind of know how to operate and find, fix, finish, exploit, analyze, disseminate pretty well with the best of them. My concerns are, we have 2 elements, 3 or 4 elements in the state of Texas that are special forces driven. So we do focus there, but I just, I see what's happening, and it's kind of like we're playing whack-a-mole, and it's typical complaint from the guy on the ground. You don't agree sometimes with the way the command runs the pieces on the playing field, but as I see it, I call it like I see it, and I've had discussions with the governor on that specifically, and his task force specifically. So we see it, but I like having also the OSINT guys here, survival dispatch, Chris, because we've had these discussions, and of course, Jeff, from your standpoint, to bring in the not OSINT side, but I know you can't pull anything off the red side, but you understand how to think in that world. This generates, we've got to find, for me now a civilian, but working in the think tank or do tank world, the decision points with which we need to make our next decisions to move the courses of action a little bit further down the road, because law enforcement can't do it alone here, and the National Guard just can't do it alone here. It's all hands on deck.
And Doc, I think that's one of the real strengths. If you looked at the USG before 9/11, it was the HOLE, whole of government. The one thing we've matured, and this is one of our asymmetric advantages against any nation, is now we do focus and operate as the whole, WHOLE of government. The cross communication, the inbreeding amongst the tribes has never been stronger. I think that's where we solve our issue and really support what Texas is trying to do. And we got to go back. We never lose sight. We are a nation of immigrants. Immigrants are so important to it. It is another one of our strategic advantages, our ability to immigrate people into our nation and assimilate into our way of life and our values. But it has to be done legally. It needs to be controlled, and it has to have the quality that we've historically had. I think that's the challenge our political leaders are dealing with right now. And I think that's going to play out in the election. We're going to see, Roland, because I don't think anyone's satisfied, and they shouldn't be, with the current state of play.
Good copy. Yeah, excellent.
Doc,
Go ahead, Chris.
I'd like to add something that you had firsthand exposure to as well, but context on this conversation that we're having right now. And Jeff, feel free to let Mike Sterling know that I shared this following point with everybody. But Doc and I were at Mar-a-Lago a couple of weeks ago for the Border 911 Gala, and the former commissioner of the NYPD gave a really good speech, and he brought it to a really fine point. So there were 19 individuals that physically perpetrated the attacks on 9/11. According to the commissioner, and I have no reason to not believe him, he said that the countries that we have reciprocity with as far as sharing records on individuals is concerned reveals 200,000 known criminals have crossed our border in the past 3 years. from countries that we exchange information with. But he also said there are more countries that do not exchange that information than the ones who do. So if we have 200,000 known criminals have come into the country in the past 3 years, what's the real number? Is it 500,000? Is it a million? Either way, it dwarfs the 19 individuals who operated pretty much in their own little bubbles until they were activated. And we got 9/11 out of that. So, I mean, Doc, what are your thoughts on that?
Right, exactly. You know, that's what we do every day, you know, for a living and to continue to live. So we look at those numbers and we know that, you know, for example, 17,000 Haitians showed up a year and a half ago in Del Rio, most of which were family units. And you know, whether they were being used as pawns or not, it overwhelmed the system. And then through that system, then we ended up with chaos. Well, as we know as operators, in chaos are the seams and gaps of which I would exploit all day long. And then I would be moving things, products left and right. I mean, my dog and I rolled up, you know, 7 guys with a bag of fentanyl, you know, middle of the night, just trooping the line. So this is just what happens. So, but I will say this, that from the 17,000, there was another 6,000 that were never really estimated, never really hands-on grabbed, put into the point of entry holding area. They just disappeared into the periphery, either upstream, downstream, as something, a tactic that Pancho Villa did, you know, moving cattle and people way back in the day. So, you know, it's a porous border, regardless of fence. It is always going to be that way, and there's nothing we can do about it. We got good seasons where the water's higher, but we've got to also look at more ingenious ways to shut that border down, to slow it down. Look, my dad was an immigrant, came here legally back in the 50s. My grandpa fought in World War II as an OSS, you know, partisan. I respect this country, and my family, half my family comes from downrange. But I will say this, that the system, when it's overwhelmed, cannot afford equivalence to the amount of security that we had prior to this debacle that we're in down here. And I'm not crying, I'm not belly aching, I'm just telling the facts.
Yeah, I think what people they lose focus. You know, it's kind of like ooh shiny, and right now it's immigration versus terrorism. But you got to realize, with the border the way it is, it's the same problem. You know, the people coming, if you cannot determine who is entering your country, you have a terrorism problem, because there's a lot of people in this world that would love to see us dead. So you cannot separate the two issues, because if you cannot get a handle on terrorism until you get a handle on the border. And that's just the way it is.
That's it.
Nice. I have a question for all of you that came through. Doc, I've asked you this before about a month ago, but maybe things have changed. There's been some reports that the northern border is also picking up now. Is that true? What do you what is your?
Well, it absolutely has. It's been picking up for some time. You know, I don't focus there, but Ann Vandersteel and I spoke up in Dallas a few days ago, and she had those numbers from Michael Yon, as he was just in Canada reporting. But that's been a porous border. You know, one of the there was a terrorist stop there on New Year's 2016-17, I believe, that was stopped in Washington State that was on their way down. It was just a Border Patrol agent just happened to witness a bead of sweat. You know, that kind of stuff happens. The trunk was full of explosives headed for LAX, right? That was the intent of that terrorist that was doing that. So don't discount anything on the northern border as well. Absolutely. Good question.
That is the longest undefended border in the world, between Canada and the United States. And if you go to the northeast to some of these towns that have been around for many hundreds of years, so upstate New Hampshire and Vermont, one side of Main Street is in America, the other side of Main Street is in Canada, and I've been there. So going from one country to the other is literally a matter of walking across the street. So there are now programs from these people who are advertising the ability around the world to get people into America, that if you pay them X amount of money, I've heard figures in the $7,000 to $10,000 range, they will fly you into Canada. It's a lot easier to get through their customs than it is to get through ours. And then they will escort them to these small towns in those northern areas, and they literally walk across the border. It's as porous or more porous than the Mexican border.
Let me remind everybody here of one little fact, and that is on 10 January of last year, Obama and Fidelito Trudeau flew to Mexico to join Obrador, wherein they made the Declaration of North America. Immediately thereafter, Mr. Mayorkas, who has no oath of office, welded open the border gates. In other words, that declaration that appeared as an executive order was unopposed by anybody in our government, but had the effect, from an international law point of view, of dissolving our federal government in furtherance of a North American area, similar to what happened when Europe, all those countries became the European Union. That is what is in effect now. They don't want a border. They want a North American area. And that's when you're seeing policy being formed, and why you see Mayorkas up there on Capitol Hill not being impeached, because he's doing what he was instructed to do.
Roger that. Yeah, I remember you brought that up, and I think you said Obama, but you meant Biden. I knew you did.
Biden, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
Who opposed him? Who
Let's
opposed
be real
Biden?
here. Who's Biden's puppet, though? I mean,
Oh, I knew
you
that was
very
going to
much.
come out.
Thank
Yeah,
you
when
very
have a
much.
situation like that, it's the weakest link thing. Whoever has the weakest rules, regulations, border security, that becomes your border security. It's like a chain. You can have three really big, strong links, but if you got one that's made of paper mache, your chain's not going to stay together.
Well, my oath of office was the Constitution of the United States and the Constitutional Republic. So that's where I'm still going, even though I'm out of uniform. I'm sticking with that.
God bless
And
you.
and I know that many of my brothers and sisters in uniform still do. And so, regardless of a declaration, that's like a strongly, worded resolution. That's just an opinion.
Well, it's like an
Who,
executive
however,
order.
Colonel,
But
who in our government stood up and said, "You don't have the authority to do that, Mr. Biden"? Anybody in the legislature? Anybody in the nobody contested it. Nobody said you don't have the authority. Not one voice. Why? Because it is all a plan, right? That's what we're watching.
Yeah. Well, and if that is the case, and I tend to lean that way at this point, because I've been kicked in the shins too many times to not think that I'm possibly playing soccer down here on the border without shin guards. We've got to we've got to tighten up the shot group, because this border is porous, and it is look, you at the height of Operation Lone Star with 10,000 troops on the border. 10,000 troops on border was the height of the numbers coming across, and that's all we had to dedicate from the Texas National Guard. So when you're pulling shifts 24/7, 365 at 1,250 miles, you can't cover the whole border. And then what do you do when you see them? You count their heads and you give them to a processing station who gives them a piece of paper that says show up in 5 years at the most, Title 42. And
Right.
so we look at that and just think, once again, I'm beating a dead horse here, but the Republic of Texas is in a fight.
Thank God. Thank God. You're the only one standing while the rest of the nation watches it dissolve in front of our eyes. God bless you for so doing.
There's some
Fly
great
our
people in there.
Texas flag under our American flag here in Arizona.
is there a rainbow flag too?
Oh, Melissa.
You do have the come
You
and
are
take
awesome.
it flag also from Texas, but
Hey, Doc, I have a question for you. When you and the dog intercepted these folks, did you have a weapon on you?
I sure did. Absolutely.
With ammo?
Yeah. Okay. You'll love this story. So the governor has us over there in the hangar at Del Rio, and he wants to give, hey, good job. I want to meet this guy with the dog. He says, hey, how many Green Berets we got on the border? I said, sir, you just got one. I said, there's a saying here in Texas: one riot, one ranger. I said, in this case, it's one humanitarian crisis, one Green Beret. And he goes, well, what would you recommend? I said, get more Green Berets and dogs, and let us go out there and stop these guys, right? Number one. But he goes, how did you get these guys? And I said, well, I'll be honest with you. It's 3 a.m. I stepped off the line for a second. I had to relieve myself. I'm in the bushes, and the dog picks up the scent. And he goes, well, I'm going to give this coin to the dog. And I said, okay. So we knelt down, and Joe got a governor's coin. Kind of like Forrest Gump. Well, I was peeing, So, that's the facts.
So speaking of special forces, Bob's going to hate that I'm saying this, but Bob was also a SEAL, and one of his guys, Don Mann, who's good friends of all of ours, loves to tell people how everybody in the SEAL community consider Bob the greatest SEAL of all time. He is the
I've heard that numerous times. Yes. And we respect that.
There couldn't be any further from the truth. What made me successful for all those guys, the people we had, and that's what I was most proud of. The people, our process is tough. It's very difficult to get through the process. The guys suffer for a year and a half to earn that trident. The plus side of that, and I think what made our community so strong, because we had trained them to suffer so well, they would stay a full career, 30 years, in my case, 40 years, because they liked suffering. Because it was a hard work. They were deployed all the time. They would combat, all that kind of stuff. And those people is what made us have. It wasn't an individual. It was a collective. And that's kind of the theme of this book I wrote. We're all smarter from the activity we're doing today, interacting with each other, learning from each other with experience-based knowledge. And that's so powerful for any team to understand and inculcate and use. And so there is no greatest SEAL of all time. They were all amazing young men. And now you get these young kids. I got to tell you a great story. We'd come out of Afghanistan. We'd been there. We went in last of September, and we came out in August, I think the following year. And we come back to San Diego, and we're just getting a conjugal visit before we're going to go off for the invasion of Iraq. A young kid comes in my office, and this is in the book, in fact. And he says, "Sir, this is too hard on me and my family. I think I'm going to get out of the Navy." And I go, "What? What the hell are you thinking about? We're running and gunning. This is what we trained and prepared for." "No, I think I'm going to get out." So I shift gears. I tell him, "Well, you should think about staying in the reserves. Go get your man." And he looks at me and goes, "Well, I'm not getting out of the Navy." I go, "You're not getting, what the hell would you think about leaving the SEALs and saying?" And he says to me, "Well, sir, I'm going to be an astronaut." And I kind of laughed. I said, "Well, you think you're a rocket scientist or something?" He came back and answered, "Well, sir, I am a rocket scientist." I wanted to go across the table and choke him out because he was just flexing his intellectual superiority over it. And the son of a gun.
I thought you were going to say he wanted out of his marriage.
No. He became an astronaut. His name's Chris Cassidy. So incredible career in the SEALs. Wow. Went on and served NASA. Lead instructor. Now runs the Honor Foundation down there in Texas, and just indicative of the type of people we had in our community. And so when you have teams like that, you just can't.
Great people.
Yeah. I would argue that Bob has just showcased the humility that the GOAT has. He proved it right.
Hey, one more thing before we go, Melissa. I want to pop up Jeff's books, because Jeff's got a couple books, just real quick, just so people know we got some smart people in this room that can write things, because all I can do is tell stories.
Can write
Don Mann and I wrote this one, and I think you guys would appreciate the plot line. It's a group of select special operators from all over the world who get to hunt terrorists with no rules.
Oh, count me in.
The other one is about, actually it looks at historical political assassinations, and it looks at it from the assassin's perspective and what they were trying to accomplish. And then at the end of each chapter, it basically breaks down and were they successful in what they were trying to achieve. But it starts with Caesar and goes all through history.
I'm getting that. Can I listen to it on audio? Yeah.
Yes, and we'll make sure to have all these links available in the description.